ж ми буде брати яму? Хто ж ми буде брати яму? Ей, виберуть ми чужі люди, виберуть ми чужі люди.
Well, welcome everybody to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. We're glad to have you here for our first of 10 weekly summer forum programs. Today, of course, is about Ukraine, and additional programs coming up are at our church website, and you can check those there. Unfortunately, because of the Salt Lake County change to a high transmission rate in Salt Lake, we are requiring masks, and it looks like everybody's got them. So, great. You Zoom people out there, if you're alone, you don't need to wear the mask. So, happy Father's Day, everybody. You know, there couldn't be anything more important than to be a good father, to teach your kids, to educate them, love them, and encourage them to be good citizens. Also, today, officially, is Juneteenth, which is the celebration, and our state made it an official holiday just last year. And it's a celebration to have of the recognition that slaves were told in 1865 on this date that they were free, even though the Emancipation Proclamation happened 2.5 years earlier. They had to be told that by the Union Army. And I encourage you to attend Juneteenth celebrations, which happen today and tomorrow, to show your support. We Unitarians believe that it is our duty to make the world a better place while we are here on earth. And this Summer Forum series is an effort to move toward that goal, to educate people on important issues of the day. Due to the topic in our panel, we may go a little longer than normal. We'll probably go to about 10:45, but we'll be flexible on that. And then we'll pass the plate, and our donations this week only will be going to the International Rescue Committee. I think you may have gotten some QR codes that direct you directly there, or you can give them to the First Unitarian Church, and we'll see that they get to the International Rescue Committee, because with all the evacuees or refugees from Ukraine, some are coming to Utah. You just know that, and we'll hear more about that. After the panel discussion, we will pass the collection plate. That's an opportunity to meet your neighbors here, and that'll just be about 5 minutes. And then we'll go to a question-answer session, so be thinking as you're listening about what questions you may have of our panelists. In my mind, for summer forums, that is the best part of the programs. Join us after that in Elliott Hall or out on the plaza. On the plaza, you don't need to wear masks. We'll have the doors open to Elliott Hall. And it's an important thing to socialize. And please try and meet at least 2 new people. You know, it's real easy to go over and talk to your friends, but let's not let people that maybe aren't part of this church community, let's give them a warm welcome. And with that, I'll turn it over to Karin Baumgartner, who's put this program together. And thanks so much, Karin. And everybody, enjoy.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm Karin Baumgartner. I'm a professor at the U here, and I'm a member of the First Unitarian Church. Well, Mark, thanks for your opening words and for reminding us that we are also commemorating Juneteenth today and tomorrow. For this holiday, we are indebted to Ms. Opal Lee, who is responsible for bringing Juneteenth to the nation's attention. In 2016, at the tender age of 89, she decided to walk from Fort Worth in Texas to Washington, D.C., in an effort to get Juneteenth named a national holiday. Every day she traveled 2.5 miles to symbolize the 2.5 years that Black Texans remained enslaved after President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. Wow, Freudian slip there. In Galveston, Texas, that day finally came on June 19th, 1865, as Mark has said. So later today, I'm going to be walking 2.5 miles to commemorate Ms. Opal and her determination. And I invite you to dedicate your evening walk with your dogs, if you have them, to Opal Lee's efforts. Today, I would like to open our forum with a quote by Ms. Opal. And she says, "I have to tell you that none of us are free until we all are free." And I think this is a really good segue into our topic today, the war in Ukraine. As a child of the 70s and 80s, I grew up under the specter of nuclear war, as did many of you. Like many in my generation, I was convinced that we all would be collateral damage in the follies of the two empires. And when the Berlin Wall fell, I believed Francis Fukuyama, who proclaimed the end of history we have reached. I think now we are much wiser and maybe more nihilistic. And we know that history goes on and that conflicts multiply in the absence of two domineering world powers. After the war in Iraq and the illegal occupation of a sovereign country, we should not be surprised to see a simple, dirty war of acquisition in the center of Europe. To make sense of all this, we have invited 3 experts to talk about the history of the war, the consequences for the Ukrainian people, and the US stance on refugees. But before we do that, we are going to play the Ukrainian national anthem, and I invite you, if you're able and willing, to stand while we listen to it.
Ще не вмерла України ні слава, ні воля. Ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запануєм і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду.
Our first speaker today is a colleague of mine from the University of Utah. We are extremely fortunate here in Utah that we have an expert on violence and terrorism and political regime change. Professor Marjorie Castle has worked on the transition in Poland. She's the author of the book Polish Politics, Triggering Communism's Collapse, Perceptions and Power in Poland's Transition, and a book, Democracy in Poland, co-authored with a colleague. And she is going to talk a little bit about the history of Eastern European relations, maybe telling us where Ukraine is actually located. For those of us who might not have European geography present in their head. Marjorie.
Okay, I hope this is what you expected. I'd like to preface my remarks by observing that there's an attraction to a good war. I hope you hear the quotation marks there. I grew up in the era of the Vietnam War, which to me as a child was just a muddy, confusing, awful mess. And perhaps because of that, I remember sharply once in the mid-1970s when a slightly older girl was giving me a ride to high school. Out of the blue, she started telling me how she'd been wishing that she lived during World War II, when good and bad were perfectly clear and we all wanted the same thing. By the way, and I've told book references are welcomed here, I'd strongly recommend in this regard a book that came out last fall by Elizabeth Samet called Looking for the Good War, about American nostalgia for World War II. Now, the Ukrainian resistance to the Russian invasion, together with the material and moral support provided to Ukrainians by us and other countries, may seem to us to be this elusive thing, a good war. There's this tempting attractiveness of a good war, especially when we ourselves don't have to fight it, when the costs to us are just some marginal economic inconveniences. Now, of course, in truth, there's a real tension, a contradiction even, when we put the word good next to war, or in a contradiction, a tension in expecting that any large-scale endeavor that involves fighting and killing could be somehow all good, that the adjective could fit it. So what's more useful here is the idea of a necessary war, or perhaps a justified war, a war that has to be fought for existential reasons. And to understand how this might apply to the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people's resistance to the Russian invasion, we need some background. First of all, the question of nation and national identity comes up a lot when we're talking about Ukraine and Russia. But let's be clear why we might want to have a better understanding of the history of the Ukrainian nation and Ukrainian national identity. There are two reasons why we might want this understanding. One might be because there is this claim proclaimed by Putin and various Russian pundits and ideologues that Ukraine doesn't qualify as a nation, that it's somehow illegitimate, an artificial creation, that the true identity of the people living in Ukraine, which they must be made to realize, is that they are either truly Russian or some subsidiary nation, maybe Little Russians. There's this claim made by Putin and his supporters and allies that what Russia is doing doesn't count as an invasion because of some historical unity between Russia and Ukraine. And let's dismiss this right at the start. We don't need to compare the relative founding dates of Moscow and Kyiv. We don't need to examine the role played by the Ukrainian Cossacks at various points in history. We don't need to remind ourselves of the Ukrainian national revival in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. We don't need to examine how similar or different the Ukrainian and Russian languages are, whether Ukrainian is more similar to Russian or more similar to Polish, Czech, or Slovak, or Belarusian. It's actually more similar to all four of those other languages, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that Ukraine is a sovereign state. It has been a country in its own right with internationally recognized borders for 31 years. From the point of view of the international community, this is really all that matters. When other states start deciding that this or that country doesn't qualify to be its own state and they start invading, it's a blow to the heart of the existing international order. Now, this order is imperfect, but it is based on respect for the territorial integrity of sovereign states. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a serious concern for every country in the world, with the important telling exception of a handful of countries that have designs on territory not currently under their control and the capability to take what they want. The rest of us, including the United States, the rest of us are better off in a world where a large country cannot take what it wants from a smaller neighbor by force. Such a world is dangerous, and we know that from centuries of experience. Plus, if you value democracy, if you want people to be able to govern themselves, then the fact that Ukraine is a democracy matters. Ukrainians have demanded honest elections and responsive government multiple times in the past, including in massive protests in 2004 and in 2013, 2014. Its current president, Volodymyr Zelensky, won a free and fair election, beating the incumbent. Ukraine is also a democracy whose citizens value their separation from Russia. In 1991, over 90% of Ukrainian voters opted for independence in a national referendum. 8 years ago, with the Euromaidan, what prompted the huge protests was not just the corruption of the government at that time, but its pro-Russian policies, which were viewed as taking Ukraine into the Russian orbit and further away from Europe, understood as the European Union. So we don't need to evaluate Ukrainian nationhood to know that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was a crime that the Ukrainians have the right to resist. Russia has invaded the territory of a sovereign state. Russia has attempted to overthrow the government chosen by the Ukrainian people. But there's a different reason why it might be useful to look at the power of the idea of the Ukrainian nation, the strength of Ukrainian identity, because this may help us understand what Ukrainians are doing now and are likely to do in the future. So, let's look at what actually matters for defining the nation for Ukrainians today. Holodomor. Pronunciation okay? Holodomor, for one. The artificially induced famine of 1932-1933 that killed nearly 4 million Ukrainians. That is now part of the Ukrainian national idea, the national mythology. Remember, myths can be true. Okay, there can be true elements in mythologies. This is part of that for Ukraine. And don't forget that Ukrainians remember that this was orchestrated by the Soviet leadership under Stalin in Moscow. Chernobyl, too, is part of this national history for Ukrainians. The Soviet mismanagement that led to the nuclear power plant accident in Chernobyl, the attempted cover-up, this prompted the mobilization of a number of popular organizations and movements that eventually called for Ukrainian independence. And given the human cost of Chernobyl and the lasting damage, Chernobyl itself has not been forgotten. And, in fact, public opinion research in the last decade has consistently shown that the vast majority of Ukrainians consider Ukraine to be their homeland. Ukraine, and not Russia, and not the old Soviet Union, which was asked and some chose. In fact, after Russia's annexation of Crimea and invasion of the Donbass, this percentage choosing Ukraine as their homeland increased from 80% to 91%. Now, we might see this as a shaky kind of national identity, given that roughly 30% of Ukrainians speak Russian at home. Another 20% speak both Russian and Ukrainian at home. And given that as of what I understand was the last reliable census, 2001, 17% of Ukrainians identified their ethnicity as Russian rather than Ukrainian. And of course, given the fact that ethnic identities and languages are clustered by region in Ukraine, with ethnic Russians and Russian speakers, who are not necessarily the same people, by the way. There's a lot of overlap. It's not complete overlap. Ethnic Russians and Russian speakers found more often in eastern Ukraine. But if we stay aware of how historical events can shape national identity, we can think about how the Russian invasion itself is strengthening Ukrainian national identity, strengthening the sense and value of a Ukrainian nation. Think about how names like Bucha, Mariupol have already entered into the Ukrainian national mythology. Decisions taken and actions initiated in Moscow have contributed to the strength and intensity of this idea of a Ukrainian nation, just as they did in the 20th century. And this emphasizes one aspect of the evolving Ukrainian national identity that we should keep in mind. It is now increasingly defined as anti-Russian. Now, this anti-Russianness was not natural, not inevitable, given not just linguistic similarities or a significant shared history, but also given the intermixing of populations living within the Soviet Union for all those years. It is true that for many, which side of the border you found yourself on when the Soviet Union broke up was somewhat arbitrary. And it's true that familial and social and professional ties across that border have remained strong. But the invasion's impact on Ukrainian attitudes makes it hard to foresee a Ukrainian national identity that is not solidly anti-Russia, if not anti-Russian. And what then of Russia? In the language of international relations, Russia is a revisionist power. Under Putin, Russia is not satisfied with its current position in the world. Putin's Russia wants to revise all of this, to expand it. It wants to change things. This is not to say that expansion is a grassroots demand of ordinary Russians. In fact, before the invasion, polls indicate that most Russians did not favor armed intervention in Ukraine. But the Russian government's propaganda machine has apparently changed this. In fact, something more, we are seeing a hardening of Russia's authoritarianism taking place in tandem with its campaign against Ukraine. The role of propaganda has become larger, and particularly the suppression of dissent has become more intense than at any time since the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, in political science terms, Russia today is a personalistic authoritarian regime. Not all authoritarian regimes have power concentrated highly in a single person, but this type does. Russia does. So the driver here is clearly Putin. Analysts disagree on whether his revisionism derives from his own psychological needs or whether it might be a function of the particular formula he has worked out for staying in power. But the fact of his revisionism is undeniable. And it may go beyond this kind of cold-sounding revisionism that international relations realists talk about. What we've been seeing and hearing from Putin and his people is quite literally the utter denial of Ukrainian nationhood, of the existence of a Ukrainian people. Already before the invasion, Putin was saying this. Could it get worse? It has. It's gotten worse than that. For months now, Putin's pundits and ideologues have been talking about the need to wipe out this unnation, non-nation called Ukraine. They've been talking about re-education and saying it would have to go on for decades. They've been talking about punishment and making it clear that this is punishment for ordinary people who have chosen what they call the wrong loyalties. They have been talking about eradication. So this then is, from the Ukrainian point of view, most definitely a necessary war, an existential struggle for survival, not just for the Ukrainian nation, but very concretely for any kind of future for them and their families where they might have a chance of controlling their own destinies. For those of us on the sidelines, can our support be considered justified? If we believe it is important to support such a struggle for survival, of course.
Thank you, Marjorie. I actually had not known or not thought about, what a future of Ukraine under Russia, that it would include re-education camps, and that is just a really scary thought. Our next speaker is Yevgen Kovalov, who is from Kyiv in Ukraine. Yevgen is also a graduate of the University of Utah. He is a lawyer practicing here in Salt Lake City. He has been in Utah since 2007 with some breaks for work in Ukraine and New York. And he is also the director of the Utah Ukrainian Association. So if you have questions about the Ukrainian Association, you can direct them to Yevgen. And he's going to talk a bit about his family that is still in Kyiv, and you have brought us a PowerPoint.
Thank you, Karin. I really appreciate being here. This topic is, of course, very personal, and there are some interesting topics been discussed. I was born in the Soviet Union, in USSR, and all my life I identify myself as Ukrainian, never identify myself as Russian. Although my first language is Russian. So that is some interesting topics that Putin raised, and for me, saying that I'm not who I think I am is not less than insane. So this couple months been kind of a very bad dream for me. I still kind of cannot fully comprehend that what's happening is really happening. But here we are. So I kind of want to give you some perspective or idea what's happening in Ukraine. Ukraine has a very large, very long border with Russia. It's very hard to defend. Right now, where there are active battles are happening, it's more than 1,000 miles. There are some threats from the Belarus area, and there is a little area on the southwest, where the Transnistria, and Russia has some troops there located, so there is some risk of invasion from there. There are, of course, annexed part of Ukraine, Crimea. There are risk of invasion, and there are military support coming from to support Russia troops on the south. And you can see here there's the gray area. It's the area that's been occupied in 2014. And really, for Ukrainian, the war is happening since 2014. It's been on a different scale, but still, people were dying, including civilians and soldiers, since 2014. The little pinkish area you see where the active military battles, and more like a beige area, it's the areas that Ukraine was able to deoccupy or take back fairly recently. So it's all back and forth. There are a lot of losses that each side tried to hide, and a lot of civilian deaths as well. Recently, some European leaders visited Ukraine and expressed their support to Ukraine. So Italian president and French President Macron and Scholz, German president, they all visited Ukraine, expressed support and promised military help. Also, there is joke in Ukraine. Boris Johnson of Great Britain, he's very popular in Ukraine right now, including because of his express and continuing support of Ukraine, including military support. So there's a joke that they look like Frodo, Baggins, and Sam from Lord of the Rings, which is, there is some truth to that. Ukraine side were silent about the losses. Right now they speak up, and there are some different numbers there, but it seems like the official position right now is that Ukraine is losing about 150 soldiers a day, which is near 17,000 but from February. We don't know all the losses, and there is doubt that the number is accurate. It's probably more losses than that. But UN officially confirmed about 8,000 deaths in civilians, but we all know that it's not true because there are many unconfirmed deaths because they're just not reported, especially in siege Mariupol. There are more than 22,000 civilians dead. There are almost 8 million refugees in other countries, and about 8 million displaced internally in Ukraine. What's happening with Ukrainians that in the occupied areas, they are not let go to move to Ukrainian territory, and there are some people that I know. For example, there is one family that they lived in Crimea. When Russia came to Crimea, they had to move to the eastern part of Ukraine in the Donbass area. And after Russia occupied their new home. They wouldn't let go to the Ukrainian territory, so they had to go to Russia, and then they had to, through different loops, go to the St. Petersburg, and then to Finland, and then to Europe. So it's very, and that is like a happy ending, right? There are many filtration camps where people see like a tattoo, pro-Ukrainian tattoo, or they check your phone. They always strip your clothes, you know. So it's that's insane. So many people were, at least there are some reports of executions. Because there's some Ukrainian symbolism on your body or on your phone. There's some resistance in. So Kherson there's a big city in Ukraine, on the south of Ukraine, close to Crimea. So it's a multi-million city, and it's been occupied by Russia. There is resistance, internal resistance, and some guerrilla groups that kind of try to keep Russia busy there. So recently we all heard about Bucha, or many of you heard about Bucha and the atrocities that have been discovered there. That and in April, mid-April, there were some negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, how, you know, ceasefire and maybe some peaceful talks, and maybe it can be resolved. But when the atrocities in Bucha were discovered, the society wouldn't accept any negotiation. Just you cannot do that. And you know, Ukraine side were pushed to come to the table, but there's just the government cannot explain to people in Ukraine that they need to talk after what's been discovered and what Russia has done. And recently, just a couple days ago, there were additional mass graves discovered in Bucha. These are some statistics of Russian army losses, and I just this morning read a Georgian soccer player interview, and he was kind of expressed his amusement that even he asked this rhetoric question, okay, Russians hate Ukraine, I can understand that, okay, you hate Ukraine, but do you love your own children? Your own children are dying. There are more than 33,000 soldiers died, Russian soldiers died, and they keep sending troops and using them kind of just sending to die, and many of them would not get any financial support because they are officially not in Ukraine. They're stationed somewhere else, and they are not reported to participate in war. Ukraine needs a lot of heavy weaponry to liberate the parts that have been occupied. Otherwise, you know, without Western help and significant military support, it won't be possible, because Russia is the second largest military power in the world. There are some recent news, some like a little small good that came recently. We heard about Azovstal and Mariupol, and right now there are about 2,500 Ukrainian soldiers were captured and in Russia, in different prisons in Russia. Many of them are in Moscow, Lefortovo prison, and one of the military. There's a military paramedic from Azovstal. She's a soldier. She returned to Ukraine. They were able to exchange her for Russian soldiers, and you can see her on the right from you, on the right part of the screen, and her daughter, 19-year-old, on your left side. and we kind of briefly touched on what may happen. There is some build-up on the Belarus and Ukrainian border. There is some risk on the Transnistria side of invasion. So war is it's hot war, and it's aggravating. It's escalating. As to what's happening in Ukraine beside the war, so there are definitely some economic problems. Ukraine, direct and indirect losses to Ukrainian economy has been evaluated to be about $600 billion. A lot of non-military jobs. There are simply no jobs that not connected or related to military one way or the other. There are some families that I know they would stay in Ukraine. They just cannot provide for themselves, and they had to leave and try to find, to practice their trade in Poland or Romania. So this is kind of from my personal experience. I do have a family in Ukraine. My father lives in Kyiv, and my sister also and her family, they live in Kyiv. Kyiv is a relatively safe place right now, but there are still some shelling and missiles come randomly, and they're still victims. So you see a plant that in Kyiv that been shelled. It's a train repair plant that been shelled in Ukraine just a couple days ago, and you can see on the map. So you can see on the bottom. It's where my father lives, and on the upper side, if you look at the bottom right picture, my father lives on the point on the bottom, and the shelling was on the upper side of the map. So it's just about 3 miles from his house. So that is kind of for me personally. I hope everything okay. I believe it's everything okay, but it's for a missile 3 miles, it's not a big distance. So you see here that I'm from, as Karin said, I'm part of the Utah-Ukrainian Association, and we actively help Ukrainians, including providing humanitarian support. For some, it's the only way to survive and live right now, because economy, as I said, is stalled. There's not much going on, and we buy through volunteers or help volunteers to buy produce, and the volunteers deliver it to the villages and towns in Ukraine. You can see our information here, and if you have desire to learn more or help more, you can visit our website, and we really appreciate the support that we receive from the Americans here and Utahns specifically. And I was amazed because our association was kind of not very active. We would deliver some humanitarian support to orphanages couple times a year, but after the next day after the war started, people would just proactively contacting us without any solicitation or being asked, and we're really grateful for the support we're receiving, and hope that will continue. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Yevgen. That's a great segue. I didn't plan it like that, but thank you for doing that. Our third speaker is Patrick Poulin, who is the Regional Director for the Pacific West region of the International Rescue Committee. And currently he's also the Acting Director of IRC Salt Lake City, because Natalie, who many of you know, is working for Governor Cox right now for a 2-year stint, I just learned. Patrick has a very, very long resume and has many experiences. Originally, he was a licensed clinical social worker and has worked in homeless services, anti-poverty advocacy, community development, clinical care, and teaching, and he has also served a stint in the Peace Corps in Mali in the 1980s. And I thought it was really important for us to have a way of doing something positive, of helping. And this morning when I woke up and thought, okay, today's the forum, and I quickly looked at the New York Times, and today was the first time has it been 112 days of war, that Ukraine was not on the front page. And I thought that was really significant. Are we losing our focus? Are we drifting on to other problems? And there are tons of other problems, right? But so I want to make sure that we keep our focus on this crisis. Patrick.
Thank you. Before I start, I do want to thank the church here for all the support you've given over the years. I became the executive director of the Salt Lake office back in 2007, and there was a group of you who were setting up apartments for us, and you've been doing that for the last, 20 years since. So I wanted to thank you before we get going. I'm going to talk a little about kind of some of the work that IRC is doing overseas. About 3/4 of what we do in the world is in conflict areas. And when the Ukrainian war started, we found that our offices in Germany, the UK, Greece, Italy were all of a sudden seeing the Ukrainian refugees come in. There were over 8 million refugees just since February. So if you imagine, it would be like 3 times the number of people in Utah all moving within the last 4 months. I mean, that's the amount of humanity that's being moved out. So at IRC, we ended up deploying people to both Poland and Moldova. And what we did there was try to build the capacity of the local Red Cross and other groups there by providing cash assistance, because that's what they needed. And then over time, what we found was, I mean, if you think about it, most of the refugees are women and children, right? All the men are staying in Ukraine. And so we needed to set up protection because there was concern about the safety of women and children. And then the thing about, I think, what the Ukrainians face that's different than refugees is very significant, and I don't think we fully understand it yet. When a refugee gets refugee status, and we pick them up at the airport in Salt Lake, this is their new home for the rest of their lives. They have a pathway to citizenship. They will receive services. They will find housing. They'll find employment. Their kids will be in schools. And they'll be with us for the next 100 years. For the Ukrainians, if they end up here in Utah, they're given 2 years status. That's it. There's no clear pathway for them to stay. And so when we think about how we're going to help these Ukrainians, it's a different ballgame because, in a sense, they'll come here with temporary status, and then maybe in the next 2 years we need to be helping them get back to Ukraine. So that's a total different way of figuring out how to meet the needs of people. It's one thing if you arrive and I'm going to help you for the rest of your life. It's another thing if you arrive and you may or may not be able to stay here, or you may be able to go back to your home country, which is what I imagine most Ukrainians would want to do. So to tell you today exactly what you could do for Ukrainians here in Salt Lake City, we haven't seen many yet. And so we may need to have a talk in 6 months from now, because there may be some things that we can have you help us with. Because right now, most of the Ukrainians are in the EU, and they're hoping that they can go back home. So, to be honest, the most you could do right now is to give to his association. You could give to IRC, and we have a direct route to get that money overseas into Moldova or Poland, where it'll go to direct assistance for people. The other thing that we're doing over there is we're setting up what we're calling healing classrooms, and that's for the children. One of the things about refugee work is when refugees end up like in camps, or they're, for instance, when the Iraqis were not in camps. And so about 8 years ago when the Iraqis started coming in, what we found was that the children had been out of school for several years, because the Iraqis were kind of living under the table in places. They weren't in camps where you could set up schools. So the whole generation lost a couple years of schooling. We found that with the other refugees, like from the Congo, where they're in camps for years, there's school programs there, so kids are getting schooling. What we're going to find with the Ukrainians, I think, I'm afraid, is that there's going to be that disruption in the school for these children again. So what we're trying to do is set up what we call healing classrooms, because first, the children have been traumatized from having to flee. They're in a new country. Think about it, today's Father's Day, and they're all without their fathers. So there's 8 million refugees, and then all their fathers are in a different country. Some of them have died, and it really sets up a different type of service delivery package. Being a social worker, of course, that's where I go. I go to the mental health side of it, the psychosocial side of it, and the easiest thing we can do is give things like food and cash, those transactional pieces. But the most important thing we can do is what I call the transformative interactions we have with people. That's where you sit down and you let that person know that they're still worthy, that they're human. You give them hope. And those are the types of things. So those are the things that we might be asking you to help us with 6 months from now, if we end up having a lot of Ukrainians here, where there could be opportunities for you to volunteer, to teach English, to do all kinds of things that really give that human connection. And I tell my staff, I say, the most important refugee that in the world is the refugee standing in front of you. And quite frankly, if we're all mindful, actually the most important person in the world is really the person sitting next to you right now, because that's the person you have contact with. Everyone else is just kind of in your head, right? My wife is at home, hopefully making a really nice Father's Day dinner for me, but she's there, and this gentleman's right next to me, so I probably need to make sure that he's the most important person in my life right this moment. And so I think that if we can all think about how we help each other as human beings, but also 6 months from now, maybe you invite someone back and we can tell you some very specific things. Because I could tell you you could volunteer now, but it won't be working with Ukrainians. It's working with other people that are just as important. But, and there are those opportunities both for our organization here in Salt Lake. The Catholic Community Services has a really good refugee program. So if you wanted to help out, you could get involved. And then if Ukrainians came in, you would be able to maybe be sitting in front of them. So having said that, I just want to really thank you. Your church, believe it or not, we have a notebook that you made, or a workbook that you made on how to set up apartments, and it is in 26 offices across the country, because I gave it to them all, and they're all trying to do similar programs like that, helping refugees. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Karin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you for reminding us that we do have refugees here in Salt Lake. And you told me 900 Afghans just came?
So yeah, we had 605 Afghans, came in about 3.5 months. So it's about 3 years of work that we did in that short period of time. And so we're helping them right now. Yeah.
So here's where you can help. We are going to be passing the plate. So if you still use cash, please give generously. If you use your iPhone or your phone, we printed out some QR codes for the rescue, for the IRC, for money to go to Ukraine. For those of you on Zoom, you can go to rescue.org to donate. Please give generously. This is a humanitarian crisis. We are going to listen to a popular Ukrainian song, and Yevgen, maybe you can explain what this song is about, because I speak no Ukrainian.
Sure. So this song was written in 1993, just a couple of years after Ukraine became independent from USSR, by Taras Petrynenko. The score, the music, and the lyrics written by Taras Petrynenko, is a Ukrainian rock musician, and this song is kind of explains he explained his love to Ukraine, and that his life and his love is not possible without Ukraine, and that he brings his heart to Ukraine's feet.
Дороги іншої не треба, поки зорить чумацький шлях. Я йду від тебе і до тебе, по золотих твоїх стежках. Мені тобі не можна не цвісти, лиш доти варто в світі жити, поки живеш і квітнеш ти. Україно, Україно, після далечі доріг, вірне серце твого сина я кладу тобі до ніг.
you. I don't think our church is used to really loud rock music. Joan and I just discussed this. So this is the moment in our morning where we get to ask our questions of our three experts. And again, thank you all for coming and sharing your Sunday morning with us and helping us understand what's going on in Ukraine. So if you have a question, please indicate. And my son and where's my other helper, will get a microphone to you. So maybe we'll start with Camille. Samir, do you want to go there? It should be on already.
Okay. We had a guest from Ukraine who was here as part of the Utah Citizens for Diplomacy. And he came with a delegation of LGBTQ folks. And the last we heard from him, he lived in, I'm sure I'm not saying this right, Zaporizhzhia, where the nuclear, yes. And in this delegation, there was a social worker, a psychologist, and a pastry chef. And so they really, when they were here, they were really engaging about trying to get equality in Ukraine for the population and saying how much worse it was in Russia for the population. The last we heard, he had made it out of his town, and two of the other people had made it out. And then we wondered if it was safe for him if we tried to email him now. You know, if the Russians are picking up people's phones and looking at their contacts, would that potentially endanger him?
So, well, I'm not gonna give you like a precise answer what can happen. What I know there's what recommendations are for if he follows them, he shouldn't be at risk. So, people who are on the occupied territory been advised to delete all social networks from their phone, no emails or any of that communication that can discredit them. So they should be understanding that their phone can be reviewed or read by Russians, and they should not be having open emails or like that kind of stuff. So any apps that could kind of discredit them in front of Russians. So if he follows those recommendations, if you send him an email, he should be fine, because he shouldn't have like an open app where someone can just easily with a button open his emails and read them, if that makes sense. So I say it would be safe to send email, but even if you send, maybe just try to be neutral. Don't kind of reveal, oh, did you kill those bastards, or I'm sorry, but kind of like, where you are, what's happening, can we help, or something like that. So I think it should be okay.
Thank you for coming and speaking to us on this very important subject. My question is to all three of you. Thinking problem solution. We see the problems, plural. They're evident, historic. Solution, short term and long term. Short term, Henry Kissinger's suggestion. Ukraine, give Russia what it wants. So we get détente, we get an end to the war. Or maybe potentially a coup d'etat led by Russian generals against Putin. Maybe greater mobilization by NATO. The United States is 70% of NATO. Just today, Johnson, UK, has said that this is a long war. This is not going to end tomorrow or this year. So, but when it's over, long term, a Marshall Plan to rebuild Ukraine, looking at those numbers are devastating. Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. There's about 44 million people in population there. About 16 million at least, almost half the population. They're refugees in Poland or elsewhere nearby, those coming here. So thinking the problem, working the problem, short term and long term, could we hear your suggestions?
I think the Kissinger suggestion wouldn't work because it didn't work in 2014, right? So part of Ukraine was occupied in 2014, and it didn't stop Russia from going further. There are some indication inside Russia that they want to restore Soviet Union in the borders before 1991. So that involves NATO countries, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. So that is direct conflict with NATO, and Russia have been probing what the response will be, because we don't know how NATO would respond, how NATO countries would respond. So I think giving up Ukrainian territory will not solve the problem, and there are examples of that. What is the other solution? I think it's the good scenario, or more like a happy scenario would be for Russians inside Russia to realize that the war is not righteous. Right now they think that the war is righteous. The Ukrainians are Nazis, fascists, and the Western world is an enemy. And Russia has this specific, purpose in the world to make the world, turn on the correct path or whatever. So I think the happiest scenario would be for Russia to realize that the war is not righteous, and for oppressed groups inside Russia kind of gain more power and to overthrow Putin and the regime and all that. Kind of come to the different understanding how the world and the nation should work together.
I'll echo that. To be honest, my first reaction to your question is just to basically be stumped, because I cannot offer a solution. However, I can say something of an answer. I can say what won't work. I can say that the Kissinger idea of off-ramps, Mearsheimer idea of off-ramps, pressing Ukraine to make concessions to Russia. Yeah, didn't work in 2014, didn't work in 1938 and 1939. That does not seem like a good idea. I don't have a proposal what to do otherwise, other than simply supporting the Ukrainian government in the continuing, as long as it chooses to fight, as hard as it chooses to fight, that it is, their choice rather than ours. I do agree that the most desirable scenario, which we can do nothing about, would be leadership change in Russia. Not, even if it doesn't bring about a more a opening, a liberalization, a different approach. I mean, a move towards democratization, for example, a less authoritarian government. The mere fact of changing the people in power means that they would get in people who were not committed to this course of action, who could change direction for Russia without themselves backing down and discrediting themselves. They would be able to do that. So that is desirable. The likelihood of it happening, I can't say much there. The one thing, if this makes you feel at all optimistic is when this kind of thing happens, that kind of internal coup, it'll happen unexpectedly. So that doesn't mean, so nothing I'm saying about the improbability of it means that it couldn't happen tomorrow.
Oh, right. So just to follow up a little bit on what Professor Chambliss was saying, I see three options, and this came from an opinion piece in the Times about a month or so ago. Option one, Ukraine wins. Option two, Russia wins. Option three, there is some type of détente, as we were talking about. We've already spent $50 billion, or allocated $50 billion to Ukraine to win. That's more than we spent in Afghanistan. So I think our options are pretty clear. That's what we want. I don't know if this is going to happen. As you said, Ukraine is no longer on the front page of the New York Times. This could be pretty serious long-term problem. One last comment, and that's that I believe that Putin wants that option to have some of his territory, that is the Donbass and Crimea and that area, for his own propaganda purposes. It's a very frightening idea. I think we can win, but I don't know what. I'm sorry, I'm dropping out of my brain right now. I'd like a comment from any of you or all of you. Thanks.
I'm not sure if I will stand behind this myself, but I have heard an interesting analysis in response to the argument that Putin needs that off-ramp, that he needs to have, for example, as the kind of territorial gains that you were talking about. And the argument in response to this goes that Putin doesn't need anything because of his control of propaganda. He can sell any outcome. If we are talking about my last remarks, I made him sound vulnerable. I see his vulnerability to vulnerable inside the elite. He's extremely powerful. They're all dependent on him. However, that could change. His vulnerability to the masses, to wider forces in Russian society is in the short term nil, and the medium term rather weak as well. So he doesn't have to have that off-ramp.
Yeah, I can add to that. You know, I don't think Putin really needs anything or cares about either territory or people. And there is an interesting interview of Nemtsov, who was killed in Moscow by allegedly Putin, some of the Putin assassins. And he talks about how Russians are treated in the areas that are in the countries, the relationship of which are important to Putin. I could not recall the country's name, but it probably Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan, where Russians don't have many rights or persecuted, but because of the importance of the economic relations, there's nothing happening. There's no protection, no movement from Putin. So he doesn't care about either people or territories. I think personally, I think he's just been too much at power of a big country. He's a tyrant who has no, check of his power. And he's just insane. He thinks he's the greatest Russian leader, Peter the First, or whatever, and he just wants to bring the USSR. If you look at what is connected in his ideology, it just makes my brain explode. It's communism, religion, Stalinism, and rock. It just the concepts that like bikers, right? It's just like I cannot comprehend how these different ideologies can become one. It's just insane.
We have a question from our Zoom congregation. So Tristan is going to read it.
Yes, Zoom is asking, it would be interesting to know how many Russians are against this war in Ukraine. We've heard stories of Ukrainians who have parents in Russia, and these parents are believing the big lie that Putin is telling them.
The polls show, I don't know whether we can trust them, that probably about 20% of Russians do not support war in Ukraine. About 80% support one way or the other. Many of them do not know that there's actually war in Ukraine. There's a special operation that only bad Ukrainians that are Nazis are killed, and there is no actual destruction of Mariupol. It's all, fake news. So that's my answer. I do have family, extended family in Russia that moved from Donbass to Russia, and they do not believe that Ukraine being attacked.
I'm sorry, they don't believe what?
That Ukraine is attacked by Russia.
Can you send them emails?
Well, actually what happened, my 3-year-old son, he kind of took grandma's phone and sent them Ukrainian news by accident, and they just called back and say, hey, we don't believe all this, it's just not true, and I cannot comprehend it either. It's just very hard.
So we've been using economic weapons to try to quell this war, and what kind of an effect has it had, the economic sanctions that we've taken on Russia? Has it actually hurt the oligarchs? And if they are hurting, would they press Putin to stop the war? Or is it only hurting the ordinary people?
Just a little bit of a shallow, superficial answer. My impression that it is hurting the oligarchs in many ways, whether I'm not sure how deeply it's hurting their economic interests, but it's certainly hurting them in terms of what they want to be able to do, and which includes having their children be able to live and study abroad with access to all their funds and so forth. One thing I can say with a little greater certainty is the oligarchs can't get Putin to do anything. The term oligarch in Russia is a bit of a misnomer. It really, they do not have power. They are the rich business people. That's a better term than oligarchs, really, though we've been using oligarchs since the fall of the Soviet Union. It is this personalistic authoritarian regime. They are allowed to function by Putin. Putin allows them to build fortunes. They do not allow Putin to hold power. So unfortunately, they are not a way really provide themselves personally a way of leverage on the Russian government.
So the economic sanctions really aren't doing any good?
Well, it depends upon, I don't know, I'm sorry, this is an angle that I should have been following more closely, but I haven't. It depends upon how seriously they're hurting the Russian economy. This is important for for two main reasons. I don't know how badly it's hurting the Russian economy. I can tell you what's important about that. One, it could hurt the Russian war effort. That's major. I was seeing an interesting argument yesterday about how this war is showing us the importance of war industry. The sheer amount of equipment and materials and ammunition that it uses up is demonstrating to us how real wars between modern militaries require an industrial infrastructure and a continued industrial effort that the countries in the world that are likely to get into wars may not really be prepared for. And certainly the economic sanctions on Russia can hurt Russia's ability to do that. I'll leave it there.
And I can add, I think there's need for economic sanctions, and they do work. They do not work as expected, I think, and the effects probably will be more long-term. But in addition to kind of limiting Russia's military abilities because of the sanctions, it also kind of has a status effect on Russia, being kind of an outlier and kind of put Russia on the, beyond the age of a civilized country kind of thing. So I think it makes sense to impose sanctions, economic sanctions on Russia.
I've been having Ukrainians come to stay with me for 7 years, and it's been kind of different ones, but one in particular that I just sent today in his truck that he's now driving and making $150,000 a year so he can bring his family here. And so our conversation in Mill Creek Canyon last night until it was dark was so interesting. He might be being fed Ukrainian propaganda, but he feels Ukraine will be victorious. And he brought this up. What happens to the Russian Federation if Ukraine wins? It breaks apart. So this is very, very important to Russia. Have you heard that? Have you thought that? What happens? And you say, okay, Putin's gone. No, it could be worse. I'm not saying he shouldn't be. And evidently he has 2 severe illnesses. One is Parkinson's, the other's heart disease. But you could be dealing with a devil you don't know that could be worse. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, if we're talking about simple leadership change in Russia, the idea that it could be worse, right, it's a little hard for me to imagine worse right now. For the world in terms of ideology, in terms of ambitions, and the international impact for the world, it's hard for me to imagine worse. It doesn't seem, I wouldn't expect a new leadership team or a new leader to be someone we would like. But I really don't imagine it to be worse. As for the question of the breakup of the Russian Federation, let's remember this isn't something like Chechnya breaking away. Ukraine was never part of the Russian Federation, so it doesn't necessarily imply that the various regions such as Chechnya would break away.
In the last 31 years, it has been part of Russia, or Russia has been part of Ukraine.
I'm sorry? Okay, I'm sorry, please repeat.
Yeah. Other than the 31 years. Russia.
No, it hasn't.
Ukraine has either been part of Russia, the Soviet Union, and before that, I mean, if you go back the last 1,500 years, Kyiv was the capital of Russia. So they've been going back and forth forever, and I think you're very Pollyanna-ish if you think it can't be worse. I'm not saying he shouldn't go, but I think it could be much worse.
I would disagree that Ukraine has never been, okay, for the Ukraine, once we start talking in these terms, we are taking concepts of modern day countries, modern day nation states back into a period of time where they don't fit. In fact, the modern nation states that we see in Western Europe developed only very late in the territories that are now Russia and Ukraine. So the fact that Ukraine was part of, for some time part of the Russian Empire, and that is very different, not part of Russia, part of the Russian Empire, is really not necessarily significant here. There is also this pattern of how the Soviet Union broke up. In a certain sense, it broke up very neatly. All the Soviet socialist republics broke apart from each other. We looked at them, Soviet specialists back in the day, criminologists, a lot of us looked at them as fictions. But then it turned out with the breakup of the Soviet Union, they all became their own independent countries. And some are more or less, Belarus is kind of, a satellite, but it still remains a independent sovereign nation. And meanwhile, Russia has drawn, in the years since the breakup of the Soviet Union, has drawn a very sharp line against any attempt for regions, special territories, special oblasts within Russia to break off. Okay, it's fought very, the Chechnya wars. So that line really has been drawn very clearly. I don't, and so but the way that matters, and the way we're not just, getting into definitions for the sake of definitions, the way it matters, the question you're bringing up is whether there is a erosion, whether there's a tendency for Russia itself, regions within it, to successfully push for independence because Russia fails in this expansionist effort. I don't see the causal logic, other than the fact that the possible logic might be that if Russia is defeated, Russia has a major defeat, the Russian government under Putin has a major defeat on the world scene, gets discredited, that might mean strange things could happen. That would be my answer.
Okay, we could go on all afternoon, but we've got to have a last question, so this gentleman right here is going to ask it, and then we can adjourn to the patio and the Elliott Hall. You can take the mask off.
I just wanted to know how much the English language is taught, learned, and spoken by the Ukrainian people.
Well, it's definitely became more popular. So when I was growing up in Soviet Union, German was the language that been taught mostly. And after that, after the break of the USSR, English became the first foreign language to be taught. I wouldn't say it's great in Ukraine right now, as people probably, Ukrainians, they don't have much of a exposure to international business or the need for, to speak English. But it's definitely growing more and more popular, and I don't know. It's I wouldn't say it's nothing that how it's been taught and used in like Scandinavian countries or in other Western European countries. I hope it answers your question.
The refugees coming here, will they speak good English?
Well, I think most of the younger population, they can maintain a conversation. The older population, like my mom age group and older, they wouldn't probably speak English. They need to learn, and it probably wouldn't go well for, it's harder for older people to learn, but it wasn't a good remark maybe, but I think, I think younger population can pick up quicker, and they have some basic knowledge.
They probably have exposure to YouTube. Right?
Yes, that's.
So, well, thank you. A round of applause for our three speakers. And I was told the amount of you cash people. Sarah, can you repeat it? Can you yell it?
650.
So 650 in cash. Yay! Wow. Give yourself a round of applause. So now, you at home people and you QR code people beat 650. I challenge you. Before we adjourn outside and get some coffee, I want you to listen to one last song, and Yevgen, you can maybe explain what this song is about. It's called Plyve Kacha.
Plyve Kacha, yes. So this song was written in 1940s, around World War II, and it has been used by Ukrainian resistance army when on the funerals of soldiers, and it's kind of a sad song of has some notes of a mom that at the river, and there are like ducklings in the river, and it just expresses the son's fears of being lost and killed in the foreign land.
Kacha по Tysyni, płynie Kacha po Tysyni. Mamko ж moja, не лай мені, mamko ж moja, не лай мені. Залаєш ми в злу годину, залаєш ми в злу годину. Сам не знаю, де погину, сам не знаю, де погину. Погину я в чужім краю, погину я в чужім краю. Хто ж ми буде брати яму? Хто ж ми буде брати яму? Ей, виберуть ми чужі люди, виберуть ми чужі люди. Ці не жаль ти, мамко, буде, ці не жаль ти, мамко, буде. Гей, якби ж мені, синку, не жаль, якби ж мені, синку, не жаль. Ти ж на моїм серцю лежав, ти ж на моїм серцю лежав. Ей, плине Кача по Tysyni, плине Кача по Tysyni.